So let's talk about some risks that blockchain actually doesn't necessarily add value, but in some cases may even potentially make more challenging or difficult, right? So, for every coin, there's a heads and a tails, right? So let's talk about some of the downsides. I don't know if this is necessarily a downside, but one of the things that is an impact of blockchain is it disrupts something called trust brokers. So what is a trust broker? A trust broker is like a notary public, right? A bank, a government land title office, a state division of motor vehicles. These are people that we trust, that we place our trust in if we're going to deal with an untrusted party. So if you're going to buy land or property from somebody, how do you know that they own it, right? So the government, the division of motor vehicles, something like that would maintain a register and a log, and this is kind of a way that we deal with that. Or same thing with a bank, right? If somebody is going to take product out of your store and they swipe your credit card, the bank's going to tell you whether or not they're good for it, whether or not you'll get paid, right? You're not getting paid instantaneously. It's not like cash, but the bank is saying, okay, if you swipe your card and we say yes, then you can trust that you'll get the money in a few days, hours, weeks, whatever. Or a notary public, if you need a document that's signed by somebody and you need to have confidence that it's actually that person signing the document and they're not going to be in front of you, then you might trust a notary public to do that. And all of these intermediaries, right, have to be put in place because we don't necessarily trust everybody, and we need help trusting. So if you think of every industry that has trust brokers, right, all of those industries, those things could be disintermediated, right? If we don't need somebody to facilitate those kinds of transactions, then potentially those are all industries that would go away. Now, one of the things that's interesting is if we do move to more mass adoption of cryptocurrencies, how will that impact financial systems? Think of the entire global financial system, right, that involves banks and trust brokers. What if they weren't needed? And governments use banks to influence, monitor, and control because governments have a role to maintain order in a civil society. And they need tools to do that, right? There are always going to be bad actors, and we count on government to essentially stop bad actors from doing those things. If we disintermediate all of those folks, then how do we still deal with some things that we need and want government to do? So that's it. And then what would it be like if we disintermediate all of these? So these are just things to think about. It's important to understand that no blockchain can stop 100% of bad behavior, right? No system is 100% secure. And blockchains can make it harder for bad actors to do certain things and incentivize good behavior. But this is an area where we're likely to see a lot of disruption, where people are going to start relying on blockchain systems, recognizing that no blockchain system is 100% secure. One of the areas that we see a lot of increased activity as a result of blockchain and cryptocurrency is phishing. This is a type of attack where somebody pretends to be a bank, a cryptocurrency exchange, something like that, and they're basically trying to get you to put their credentials in. Blockchains are almost never hacked. They tend to be much more secure, again, depending on the blockchain. But what is easily hacked is the on-ramps and off-ramps, right? It's people getting into your computer, and then from your computer getting the private keys, and then with the private keys they can go in and do bad things. So it's the on-ramps and off-ramps, it's the periphery of blockchain where most of the attacks occur. Another example of an attack is an exchange attack. So this one example is where somebody got into a gate.io and they actually injected code into that exchange. So anytime somebody would send cryptocurrency or tokens from point A to point B, it would replace point B's address with their address. This was a very sophisticated attack. There's been even more sophisticated attacks. The good news is it was identified relatively quickly, and it was detected and essentially addressed before any actual funds were stolen. But it is an example of the types of threats and risks that are out there. Money laundering is another big one. Billions and trillions of dollars are laundered each year, and cryptocurrencies are globally available. They're fast. They're irreversible. and they have the ability to hide identities. So as a result of that, there's a large number of criminals essentially using cryptocurrency. Crypto laundering is still it's still a small share of the overall money laundering ecosystem, but it's still sizable, and potentially it will grow. The American Drug Enforcement Administration believes international gangs are using cryptocurrencies more frequently. They did primarily start with Bitcoin. As law enforcement is getting more savvy about being able to tracking and tracing Bitcoin transactions, they're also moving to other forms like Monero, Zcash, and other privacy coins. Also, as far as money laundering is concerned, capital flight is a big issue for countries that are trying to control their capital. So in China, for example, they don't want to lose too much of their currency, so they actually put rules in place that says there's a limit to how much an individual or a person, how much Chinese currency they can actually take out of the country. And with Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, it's a little more challenging because cryptocurrencies exist everywhere, right? Everywhere where there's a node. Yeah, so it's just a much harder thing to deal with. And when something leaves the Chinese ecosystem, goes in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, there's potentially a loss of influence and control. Drug dealing, right? Bitcoin's become a popular medium of exchange for the dark web. If you go to the dark web, you'll see all kinds of nefarious, awful things. And but certainly U.S. and European law enforcement agencies, including the U.S. FBI and the Drug Enforcement Administration, have shut down lots of illicit activity. So it's sort of a constant dance. Human trafficking is another area where cryptocurrency is being used. Right, the International Labor Organization estimates that there's 20.9 million victims. There's 150 billion in global profits. Analytics can be used to differentiate the difference between single-sex workers and what looks to be more like human trafficking. And MasterCard, Visa, and a number of others have essentially used some of their online services to suspend banking services for transactions that were primarily used for prostitution and human trafficking. From that, many of them flocked to Bitcoin. Then, since that, in 2016, the Association of Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialists have worked to really reimagine how human trafficking can be tracked. And there's a group of banks in Canada, representing the 5 largest banks in Canada, which includes the Bank of Montreal, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, the Royal Bank of Canada, Scotiabank, and the Toronto Dominion Bank. And what they did is they looked at 11 types of financial transactions, 7 types of transaction patterns, and 6 types of contextual indicators to identify the high probability of human trafficking. And so, for example, if there's a sporting event, right, there's a certain amount of transactions, frequency of transactions, time of day of transactions, proximity to other activities. All of these things, when viewed together, can give law enforcement a pretty good idea of where some of these human trafficking activities are happening. So they're using technology and blockchain to identify those kind of patterns and to support law enforcement in the eradication of human trafficking. State sponsors of terrorism is another use for cryptocurrency. We've seen with ransomware. The way this works is they'll get into a computer, they'll seize it up. Well, the WannaCry worm is an example. It got into a lot of hospital systems. It basically locks up the network, and unless you pay in cryptocurrency, then they won't unlock the computers. So lots of cryptocurrency has been paid for ransomware. North Korea used it. It's a typical use for cryptocurrency. A lot of good uses for cryptocurrency, a lot of very smart business ones, but the reality is on the negative side that does exist too. So we just have to be real about it. Fraud and initial coin offerings. Boy, this was big, really back in 2017 and 2018. It's not as big now, but you still have to be really careful. When Ethereum came out with the ERC20 token, and people could generate tokens that were listed on exchanges, now everybody could raise money for their project without going through the due diligence that is normally expected if you're going to do an initial public offering, right? Everybody just created tokens and sold them, And it was kind of like, the early days of the internet. If you had a .com after your business, people just kind of flocked to you. They didn't really stop and think about the business value, right, and the fundamentals. A .com was worth gold. And that's kind of what was happening with ICOs, right? So everybody and their mother was flocking to these things. They didn't necessarily have the business value behind them. The SEC eventually came down and said that these things are mostly fraud. There wasn't adequate due diligence. It was just a mess. But a lot of people have been defrauded out of lots and lots of money because of initial coin offerings. And I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't participate in one, but you really need to do your diligence and do your homework. Don't just dive into it. There's also some new risks that blockchain introduces that are somewhat new to the industry. So technical risks, unmet expectations, hype versus reality, loss of investment, uncertain regulatory environments, loss of global competitiveness. These are all some of the risks. Let's talk through them. So the first one is technical risks. Blockchain technology, distributed ledger technology is a new kind of technology, and there's a lot of pieces that we're still putting together. The kinds of questions you should ask when putting a blockchain solution together is, will it be secure? Will it be private? Will it be accessible? How about scalable, right? What are the demand requirements that we're going to need? How many transactions per second will it be able to do? How long will it take for a finality? Will it be able to interface with other systems, which would probably include both legacy systems and other, blockchain crypto systems? Will it be adopted, right? If you have a wallet, if you have a token-based system and nobody puts any value on the token, then that could potentially kill your project. And then will it be sustainable? Will there be enough developers? Will there be adequate tools? Will other people connect with it? These are all very, very important risks associated with the solution that you have to take into consideration. Then there's the unmet expectations, right? Hype versus reality. So this is the Gartner life cycle drawing. You've probably seen it before. There's variations of this everywhere. And I don't know exactly where we are on the curve. I think different people have different opinions, but there are those people that think that anything with the word blockchain on it is destined for gold, and they're oftentimes willing to jump into things without really fully thinking through it. So just be careful with this. Make sure that before you ever move forward with a blockchain project, it's got to pass the make sense test. And I try to ask questions at about a 5th grade level. If you ask questions and you get the response that you're not smart enough to figure out the answer, that's a big red flag. Ask the 5th grade questions and expect answers. And if you can't, then potentially you might be looking at something that's mostly hype and not substance. The GBA is developing something called the Blockchain Maturity Model. Actually, we've developed it. If you go to gbaglobal.org, under resources, you can find it. And it's a great screen to help people know and understand whether or not they're dealing with hype or something substantial. Loss of investment. So now this slide is a little dated, but the points shouldn't be lost. A lot of these projects essentially are losers, right? There are some good ones, and there's going to be more good ones in the future. But the reality is a lot of these projects are losers, and you can't automatically assume that because somebody's got a blockchain project, it's going to take over the world. Again, I would use a BMM as a very important screen for that. But more than 80,000 projects claiming to utilize blockchain technology have launched worldwide at that point. But of those projects, only a mere 8% are still active, and the average lifespan of a blockchain project was 1.22 years. So, be careful. And there's a very uncertain regulatory environment. So these comments are all taken from different countries at different points in time. I wouldn't consider any of them gospel, because many of them have changed, in some cases multiple times. And so the slide is really intended to just let you know that there's a lot of different perspectives at these different places. But I wouldn't use this slide to know specifically what the perspective was at any of these one places, because they literally change so frequently. And then there's a loss of global competitiveness. So on one hand, governments and the SEC and different places really are putting their hand up and saying, nope, slow down, too fast. We don't know if this thing works. And on the other hand, they're saying, well, we got to move quick because otherwise we'll be left behind. Puerto Rico essentially has no capital gains tax because of its status as a territory. So crypto billionaires are flocking down there. Wyoming is creating a very strong regulatory environment. Dubai has got Smart Dubai, which is essentially a very positive environment for blockchain and crypto. Australia wants to position itself as a blockchain global leader. I mean, there's lots and lots of places that are racing towards achieving this. But at the same time, they have to be concerned as well. So it's kind of like one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake. And then law enforcement risks. So like I mentioned before, governments regulate financial institutions. Financial institutions monitor transactions, right? And financial institutions report suspicious activity to law enforcement. Law enforcement uses financial records to investigate criminal activity. So what happens if the transactions are peer-to-peer without any third parties, right? This could rob law enforcement of the tools that it needs to be able to maintain order in a civil society. So again, I'm not saying yes or no, but these are some things that we just have to be mindful of. And that's it for the risks. The next module we do after this one will be pretty much how the tech works, which is just a really fun module to do. All right, so we'll see you back for the next module.